What's up guys, my name is Ace, and lately I've been getting quite a few questions about movement speeds in Modern Warfare and what the most effective way is to get a good opening route, for instance. So today I'm going to be breaking this down into maybe a little too much detail, but I've got some interesting things to point out as well when it comes to movement speed. So let's just hop into it. Now, the first thing to point out with this is you might have noticed in my gun guides, for instance, I express movement speeds in percentages. Now, the reason for this is quite simply that's how the game was coded in the past, at least, so that's just kind of how it's always been. But it also kind of just makes it easy because typically your baseline movement speed is your maximum movement speed without sprinting while using a knife. So this is our 100% value. In Modern Warfare, your standard sprint increases your movement speed by 30% from the weapon that you're holding's base movement speed, which, by the way, movement speed is 100% dependent on the weapon in your hand. It doesn't matter what's on your back. So if you're using an LMG, for instance, and you pull out your pistol, you're going to get the pistol movement speed as long as that pistol is in your hand. The LMG won't be slowing you down at all at that point. This even applies if you have the riot shield on your back. That won't slow you down at all either. But like I said, the standard sprint will increase your overall base movement speed by 30%, which isn't quite as much as previous Call of Duty games. Normally it's about 40%. However, we also have the tactical sprint option, which will allow you to move 50% faster than your base movement speed, but only for a short duration. Now, the standard duration of this tactical sprint is just 2 seconds. It's very, very short. But that can be the little burst that you need to get across a street, for instance, or just move from one piece of cover to the next, which is excellent. And it does give a pretty serious boost to your movement speed. Now, of course, we do have the double time perk, which will double your duration of the tac sprint. So instead of 2 seconds, it's now 4 seconds, which actually makes a pretty decent difference. And also it helps your regeneration rate, so you can get that tac sprint going again sooner after you run out of breath. As for crouch movement speed, just in case you're interested, this slows your movement speed down by about 55%, so a really considerable reduction to your overall base movement speed. Now, you might be wondering, what does this look like in the real world? How fast are you actually moving compared to real life? And I was able to calculate this quite precisely, actually. And with the base movement speed, this is with the knife in your hand, if you're walking as fast as possible, so you have an engaged sprint, but you're standing and moving as fast as you can, in real life terms, you're going to be moving 18 kilometers an hour, or roughly 11.2 miles per hour. As for your standard sprint with a knife in your hand, this is 23 kilometers per hour, or about 14.3 miles per hour. And then finally, with the tac sprint option, you're able to sprint about 27 kilometers an hour, or 16.7 miles per hour. Now, that doesn't really matter that much in game. I just thought it would be an interesting note because a lot of people have asked me, like, how does that translate to real world? But next I want to get into the different weapon classes and the general range of movement speeds that you get with each of these weapon classes. Keep in mind, I did exclude outliers in here, so in some cases you have one that just doesn't fit in with the rest. I excluded those just so we get a better sense of the general range. So starting it off with the slowest, the launchers can go as slow as 82%. This is very, very slow, and you don't want to be trying to get around the map with a launcher in your hand. Next up, we have the riot shield, which is 88% movement speed. So again, not really a great way to get around the map. If you've got a secondary and you're trying to get around the map quickly, you might want to swap to that one if you're using the riot shield. After that, we actually have the sniper rifle category, which ranges between 87 and 91%. After that, we've got LMGs, which are 88 to 92. Assault rifles and marksman rifles are about the same at 93 to 95%. Shotguns are 93 to 97%. SMGs are about 97 to 100% movement speed. And then finally, pistols are about 101 to 103% movement speed. And what this means is, yes, pistols actually move faster than the combat knife. This seems really counterintuitive, and in basically every video game ever made, holding a knife in your hand is the fastest way that you can be moving. However, not in Modern Warfare if we're just looking at raw base movement speed. Now, this brings things into more practical terms. What does this mean when you're looking at opening routes, for instance? If you want to get the best opening route possible and get to that power position before anybody else on the other team can, should you be using a pistol then, or should you stick with the combat knife? Well, based on what I just said, the pistols move faster than the combat knife, so you would immediately think, yes, I should be using a pistol instead, and it's a complete waste to use a combat knife. However, the combat knife does get an extra bonus, and this is your default tactical sprint duration with the combat knife is 4 seconds rather than 2 seconds. Now, this definitely has its advantages, especially for covering short distances. However, if we look at this side by side with a combat knife versus a pistol, That added 2 seconds to your attack sprint with the combat knife doesn't make up for the fact that it's just a little bit slower overall compared to the pistol. The pistol's tack sprint is faster than the combat knife's tack sprint, so at the beginning, the pistol gains the advantage. Then for that 2-second period where the combat knife is still in its tack sprint and the pistol's tack sprint has worn off, this is where the combat knife starts to regain its position against the pistol, but before you can regain that, you run out of your tack sprint for the knife, and then that's where the pistol just takes off because its overall sprint movement speed is going to be faster than your combat knife sprint speed. It's worth noting here that at no point throughout this test was the combat knife ahead of the pistol. So what this means is with shorter distances, it doesn't really matter if you've got a knife or a pistol in your hand when it comes to movement speed. However, in most situations, it's much more beneficial to have a pistol in your hand, just because if somebody takes you off guard, then you can challenge them a lot more effectively. But most importantly here is if you're planning on covering slightly longer distances like you tend to do with opening routes, the lightweight pistols like the M19, 1911, and the X16 are going to be a better option for you than the combat knife. This might seem extremely counterintuitive, and I actually know there's a bunch of pros out there that are still using a combat knife just to get a beneficial opening route. It turns out they're not actually gaining any benefit from that, and if anything, they're hurting themselves because now they don't have a pistol and they're stuck with that combat knife. Now, the difference is generally going to be quite small, but in a game like Call of Duty where milliseconds count, the pistol is clearly the better option here. Now, if you're a competitive player, you might be thinking, well, I can switch from a combat knife to my M4, for instance, faster than I can with a pistol, so that's another reason to use the combat knife over the pistol. Just to cover all my bases, I decided to go in and test this as well, and that's simply not true. You actually swap slightly faster from a pistol to an M4 than a combat knife to an M4. So in the context of competitive play and trying to maximize mobility by using your secondary, if you're using the combat knife, you're doing it wrong. You're actually better off with one of the lightweight pistols like the M19 than you are with the combat knife. So there you have it. I was very surprised. This was actually a little bit of a roller coaster of emotions as I was doing this testing, because at first I was like, wow, I couldn't believe the pistol was faster than the combat knife. But then I found out the combat knife had the longer tactical sprint time, so I thought, okay, well that's where the combat knife gains the edge. But then, once again, it was flipped around on me because when I put them side by side, that extra tactical sprint option doesn't make up for the fact that your overall movement speed is just straight up slower with a combat knife. But with that, that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover in today's video. I know it was kind of jam-packed full of a bunch of numbers and stuff, but I just thought some of that stuff was interesting, especially comparing it to the real-life movement speed, because in some previous Call of Duty games, the movement speed in-game has just been ridiculous, like completely unrealistic. However, within Modern Warfare, the movement speed really isn't too far outside of the realm of realistic, which I definitely find to be quite interesting. And of course, I'd like to know in the comment section below, first off, what do you guys think about the overall movement speeds within Modern Warfare? Do you think they're in a good place? Do you think they should be sped up overall a little bit or slowed down? And also, what do you guys think about the fact that pistols, at least the lightweight ones, are actually going to be faster and more effective for opening routes than the combat knife is? Just let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.